Incredible analysis. ESPN Plus article by Mike Clay. The play calling tendencies for every one of the 32 play callers in the NFL. And he joins us now on the World Wakanda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Mike, how you doing on this Thursday?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. And first of all, I love the article. I love the analysis. You always do a great job. But there was one thing that just stuck out to me, and I never would have expected this. I never would have thought of this. Most offensive snap counts per game. Most offensive snaps per game. Doug Pederson is one of the three guys on that list, which would surprise a lot of people here in Philadelphia because it was Chip Kelly who was supposed to be the guy with, go, go, go. But yet it's Doug Pederson, the guy who came after him, who's out there seemingly getting the most offensive snaps and opportunities for the Philadelphia organization.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's kind of interesting. And we saw this with Chip Kelly, and we kind of saw it with Cliff Kingsbury last season where these guys come in, they want to run a lot of plays. But here's the thing. If you go 3 and out, all you're doing is putting pressure on your defense by going fast, right? And we saw that during the Chip Kelly era, and we saw that with Arizona last season. You really have to execute for it to work. And I think the Eagles have done pretty well. Obviously, they've been above average offensively for the most part throughout his time with the team. And, that high volume has paid off for the quarterback counting stats and certainly the running back position and the tight end position as well. Maybe not wide receivers. We know we've had some problems there, but it has allowed plenty of volume for the offense. And honestly, that will take some pressure off the defense.
Now, while Pederson has the high volume, his mentor is not one of the three you have here, the most offensive snaps per game. Andy has a little bit less volume than Doug. So what in your eyes has been the difference that Doug has done with his offense that differs from Andy?
Yeah, well, recently it's just been obscene, off the charts, unsustainable efficiency, right? I mean, when you're just scoring at will with long throws and you're super pass heavy, that's going to lead to fewer plays. But as long as it's working, you're going to score a lot of points. And we've seen that with Patrick Mahomes, and we saw it during the tail end of the Alex Smith era. We saw it in his prime with Philadelphia, obviously, with Donovan McNabb. But that's part of it. And also, keep in mind that Doug Pederson has basically run a balanced offense over the past few seasons, whereas Andy Reid has always been, with very few exceptions, been extremely pass-heavy. And that has essentially peaked out the past couple of seasons. He has Patrick Mahomes, so why bother running the football? We know we've learned over the past decade or so, with so many smart minds, so many analytical minds studying the game, that teams need to be throwing the ball more. At this point, it's essentially common sense, and we've seen that from Bill Belichick. That's been his calling card with Josh McDaniels up there in New England. They've been pass-heavy throughout his entire tenure, and we've seen that with Andy Reid and some play callers who have athletic quarterbacks like Baltimore, for example, will lean on the run. We've seen that. There's always going to be some exceptions, but the calling card for an offense should be passing, and we've really seen Andy Reid with Patrick Mahomes kind of peak in that area. So again, if you're throwing more, it's going to lead to fewer plays, especially if you're at an extremely high level of efficiency.
Now, you mentioned the running backs, so that leads me to asking you then about Miles Sanders. Second year in the offense. There's some people who think that he can be similar to what LaShawn McCoy and Brian Westbrook were for the Eagles years ago. Do you think Miles Sanders can do that kind of production in this Doug Pederson offense?
I do. If you look at Doug Pederson's 4 offensive units, since been a play caller in the NFL, it's been with Philadelphia. All 4 running back units have been above average in carries, pass routes, touches, yardage, touchdowns, and even fantasy points if you play fantasy. So all of them have been very generous to that position, and that would kind of align again with Andy Reid's offenses, because as we know, they were very generous to that position in terms of volume and efficiency. So yeah, I think it sets it very nicely for Sanders, especially as the depth chart is currently constructed. We have to keep an eye on what they do, because we know that they were in the market for another running back. Carlos Hyde, obviously, is the top of the list. He's gone. Boston Scott is going to be involved. There's no way after that last month of the season he's going to be a non-factor. I think that he'll be pretty involved in passing situations and as a change of pace back. But all in all, we know Sanders is going to see a larger share of the touches this season, and it's really his chance to flourish in this offense. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he does.
Mike Clay joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at Mike Clay, NFL, ESPN, NFL Insider. This very thorough investigation of the play callers in the NFL. Another point you brought up in the article was Doug Pederson, his mentor Andy Reid, and former Eagles offense coordinator Frank Reich all have something in common, I noticed, which is they all get the tight end a lot of targets. But that leads me to this question. How much of it is the talent at tight end, Zach Ertz, Travis Kelce, et cetera, versus this is the scheme? So is it the talent, they're getting the talent involved, or is it the scheme that allows the talent to flourish?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think smart play callers are going to use the talent they have at hand, but sometimes you'll see people force it, certainly. So that's definitely a factor. Reich has... we've seen it for a long time from him. It's not just with the Colts, right? He was with the Chargers, and I know he had some gates there, and I believe Hunter Henry maybe for a season or so there. But with the Colts, I mean, you're talking a career year from Eric Ebron, right? You're talking about Jack Doyle. So, he's really prioritized that position. He's used multiple tight end sets, and he has relied on that position pretty heavily. So I think it's more than that. I definitely think it's scheme related. You could definitely say that about Philadelphia as well. Again, I know that Dallas Goedert has probably been targeted more than they expected because of the wide receiver injuries, but he still plays a lot, right? And they drafted him in the second round, so obviously it's a priority position for them. And then Andy Reid, I mean, yes, he's had Travis Kelce, but, we saw a guy like Chad Lewis, as a playmaker at times, and Brent Stellick obviously peaked with Andy Reid. So, he's found a way to make plenty use of that position as well. With Andy, it might be a little bit more personnel driven because he's had Travis Kelce, at least over the past few seasons in Kansas City. But I think all of the guys kind of have it in their blood, right, to use that position pretty extensively.
I wonder then, is the tight end more important for offensive efficiency and productivity than maybe we give credit for? Because everyone loves the big-time receiver, right? Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins, whether you're a fantasy guy or a straight football guy, you always look at the wide receiver. But do we sometimes undervalue the importance of the tight end then for a high-powered, efficient offense?
I think that it's really, it's a cop-out answer, but it depends how good the player is, right? Again, I think if you have, a really good tight end, you have to find a way to maximize them. And if you have two and you're not very good at the wide receiver position, then you have to find a way to make them a big part of your offense. And, you've seen that. You're going to see that in Tampa Bay this season. Obviously, Philadelphia was forced to do that with the wide receiver injuries last season. We saw it in Minnesota, who they barely had a third wide receiver on the field last season. They were rolling with the multiple tight end sets. So, again, it depends on your personnel. Are you better off going with two tight ends and three receivers when throwing? I don't think so. The efficiency stats aren't going to align with that. And you're going to see most play callers prefer to use that receiver. In fact, how often do you hear during the offseason, well, this team's going to use more two tight end sets. This team's going to use more two running back sets. We hear that one all the time. And it pretty much doesn't happen. Still 60 to 70% of the time, if not more, teams are going to have three wide receivers on the field, especially when they're throwing the football. So I think that's the way teams would prefer to go. But at the same time, having a versatile two-way tight end guy that can block and catch the football is a huge asset in the NFL. So, again, it depends on the player, but definitely an important position.
Now, we spent time talking about the offense, but I'm curious about the defense's impact on some of these numbers, because you have to wonder if the Eagles' defense, which I double-checked this on Pro Football Reference, it says that the Eagles' defense has been among the best in the NFL in time on the field. They're getting opponents off the field. So is there a factor of the Eagles' defensive success in getting Doug Pederson, the Eagles' offense, more opportunities?
I think that's certainly reasonable. You still have to get first downs and move the chains to keep the offense on the field, but definitely having a great defense is going to take pressure off an offense. I mean, that's just it's almost like saying you say the opposite, right? A great quarterback is a good defensive player, right? Because it's going to keep the defense out of tough situations. There's really no question about that. But if you look at last season, the Eagles defense faced 60 snaps a game, and that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. And by the way, that was fifth fewest in the NFL, right? So the offense was on the field a lot. The defense was not on the field facing a lot of plays, and the two can certainly go hand in hand. The Eagles defense has been pretty good, aside of maybe the quarterback position against the perimeter. It's been pretty good, especially against the run during the Pederson era. So I think they go hand in hand, right? Both units work together, and they can help each other out. There's no question about that.
Now, another offensive play call on your list, and again, I highly recommend everyone read this ESPN Plus article. You got to get ESPN Plus because this insider information is just incredible. Greg Roman, we know about Lamar Jackson last year, in the last couple of years, but what has, in your eyes, been the differences or similarities between what Roman did with the 49ers versus Baltimore versus his short time in Buffalo? Is there a lot of consistency, a lot of variation? What is your analysis showed you? Because you have 98 games called for Greg Roman. That's a huge sample size.
Yeah, it's been all the same. I mean, it's not often we find this, but he is a coordinator with a clear mission, a clear scheme that doesn't really change. And it's having a quarterback who can run the football, right? We've seen that time and time again, whether it was Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco during his time with Buffalo, and now with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. They've found the personnel to fit his offense, and they've made pretty good use of it. It's been effective. Obviously, you don't see a lot of passing volume from his offense. He's never actually, his last 5 offenses have been 25th or lower in pass attempts, but you see the quarterbacks that have been no lower than 5th in carries and rushing yards during that span. So, again, a lot of times you'll see these guys, based on the personnel they have, kind of bounce all over the place in certain categories. We've seen pretty clear consistency from Greg Roman, and it's going to be interesting if he gets a head coaching job at some point. And if they have another great offensive year there in Baltimore, you would kind of expect that. In fact, I'm kind of surprised he didn't get one this past offseason. It's going to be interesting to see if he finds a new home as a head coach and brings a more versatile quarterback in that can run the ball and throw it.
And speaking of Roman and his offenses, you mentioned the 3 different stops. Obviously 98 games is a huge sample size. You mentioned in the article also about the tight ends, about how he didn't always use the tight end the same way from stop to stop. And you mentioned a little bit earlier about how sometimes the talent can dictate that usage. But we know in Baltimore they were using 3 different guys. So is it that Roman has evolved in maybe his view of the tight end?
I think that's personnel-based for him, right? So you look at his early time, his first years as a playmaker with the 49ers, and I believe there might have been a little bit I believe there was some Vernon Davis off the top of my head mixed in there, and you had in 2011 his tight ends were 8th in targets, and then they were outside the top 15 in targets the next 4 seasons as he wound down in San Francisco and then moved on to Buffalo for a season and then 2 more games in 2016. And then he comes to Baltimore and has Mark Andrews, and he has Lamar Jackson under center. Obviously, they wanted to run the football and go heavy on sets. They were weak at wide receiver last season. We know that. And they just went super heavy with Hayden Hurst, who was a first-round pick. They traded him in the offseason. Nick Boyle, they like him as a blocker. And obviously, Mark Andrews was a gem find the year they drafted Hurst. So I think that, again, was just adapting to your personnel. Super young, kind of a weak, let's be honest, wide receiver room, but loaded with tight end talent, running offense. It kind of made sense to go that direction.
Mike, when you went through all 32 of these play callers, was there anyone's results or anything that stood out to you? Like maybe, someone that surprised you or something that said, oh, well, I didn't realize that, or that explains that kind of thing?
I think that happened pretty much throughout the entire article, nonstop. There were some things we knew, had an idea of, and then it kind of really jumps out at you. But it was interesting to kind of go through and see who has called plays, who has not called plays. And I should give a shout out to our ESPN NFL Nation team, because I could not have done this without them. I kind of set up a chart, gave my idea who I thought was calling the plays. They kind of went through week by week and charted who was the play caller that week. And then I applied it to all our data. And then now I have so much data, I don't even know what to do with it. So I'm looking forward to putting it to use going forward. But I'll give you one super interesting nugget because it's kind of insane. And that would do with Adam Gase, right? The Jets head coach, now former Dolphins head coach. We know he's a playmaker or a play caller for the Bears under John Fox. He also was the play caller for Peyton Manning during his peak years there in Denver. Now, his production really hasn't been good since those Peyton Manning days, but what really jumps out about him is that he does not run the ball at the goal line. So over the past 3 seasons, his running backs have a total of 11 carries inside the opponent's 5-yard line. That's over 3 seasons. And for perspective, last season alone, 11 players had more than that in the NFL. 11 players at 12 or plus. He is 11 over the past 3 seasons. So it's nuggets like that I came across that just kind of blew my mind. And, if you play fantasy, maybe that pushes you away from a guy like Le'Veon Bell. So that's why we kind of do this research.
That's insane. Adam Gaze, what the heck's going on with that guy? All right, Mike, I really appreciate your time. Again, the article is on ESPN Plus. You have a couple articles, actually. The one that breaks down the play callers and then one that breaks down the fantasy impact, but it's all on ESPN Plus. I highly recommend everyone jump on it. Mike Clay, follow him on Twitter at Mike Clay NFL. As all guests, he joined us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Mike, thanks again for the time and incredible work here, man.
Thank you very much. Anytime. Have a good one.